Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all you fellow PsychLifers out there. And today we have a special guest, Carlos Padron. How are you, Carlos? How you doing? Good morning.
I'm good. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
I appreciate that, man. It's honestly an honor to have you on the platform. Just to give a quick introduction to the PsychLifers out there, Carlos Padron is a Latino psychoanalyst who has done some good work in New York City. He's originally from Venezuela. And he's a psychoanalyst, he's a therapist, a qualified therapist who does a lot of good work in the community. But before we even get started, Carlos, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Juan. I appreciate being here. And I also really like your podcast and your Instagram account. Good work too. I'm originally from Venezuela. I've been here for about 15 years, so I'm an immigrant. I don't have my background. It's not originally in the mental health field. I was in academia. I come from philosophy and literature, Latin American literature. So I got very involved in that way and writing about psychoanalysis and the relation between psychoanalysis and philosophy and literature and Latin American thought. And then I slowly became interested more in the clinical part, working directly with people and helping people. I discovered that that's what I actually liked, and I've been training in that. I have a license in psychoanalysis, and I'm finishing advanced training in psychoanalysis now, which is a very long and tedious process. And I've been working here in New York City in different capacities, mostly as a clinician, working a lot with people of color, not only Latin X population, but also people of color in general. Many people who are impoverished or disadvantaged in many ways, specifically, and presenting on the work that I do and other people do with this population, and showing that psychoanalytic work can be done with this population, and I think should be done on a more regular basis. So I've also, presented on this, written on it. We might talk about it afterwards. I participated in a documentary. It was called Psychoanalysis in El Barrio, which is exactly about the topic I just mentioned, working psychodynamically with impoverished Latinx population. And then a book, a compilation, where there were many people from clinicians to scholars writing on the Latinx experience here in the United States. So that's what I've been doing, writing, presenting, and treating people from that community.
It sounds like you've been doing a lot of good work, is what it sounds like you've been doing. And to be honest, I want to tell you here in front of everybody, I appreciate your work in the Hispanic and Latino community, because I myself personally am Hispanic, and I'm not PsychLife, but I am part of it, and I want to let you know, thank you for the work that you do. I did see the documentary, Psychoanalysis in El Barrio, and maybe we should get right off to that topic, because it's an awesome documentary. I'm not sure if it's out for the general audience yet, but just so the audience gets a picture, I saw the documentary. Carlos goes out with other groups of psychoanalysts, and it goes to show the type of work psychoanalysts can have on a community, especially Hispanic community, and how beneficial therapy in general can be, as well as some political implications psychoanalysts can have in the political realm. And Carlos, maybe we should start right there from that documentary. I know that the book is stemming from the documentary, from my understanding, of course, but immediately from the documentary, I saw how there was psychoanalysts from all over the Americas and from different communities in the Hispanic community, meaning and also in South America, from males to females. And I was surprised by some of the stuff that you guys were doing. Like, for example, you actually went out into the New York City, which is already your community, and you engaged with the population to talk about some of the struggles that being a Hispanic in this community face, and the poverty that they face, and how sometimes the resources that are provided out here on the streets isn't enough for this community, and there's a lot of avenues to go around in providing those resources. It's just a perfect representation to me, Carlos, personally, on how there is money funneled into the system, but it's being mismanaged and misused and disappeared, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
why don't you talk, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit more about your work in that specific documentary for the audience in general? And I know you did it with some great people.
Yes, thanks for the question. This documentary is actually on PepWeb, which is Psychoanalytic Electronic Publishing, just pepweb.com, but which is a electronic kind of like library of psychoanalytic texts, but like the largest one. But now the documentary is going to be for free on that website, so probably they could check out the link in your Instagram, or probably you can put it up there. For a month, it's going to be for free because this website is by subscription. So the documentary was, when it came out, it was shown in different venues, at the New School, different psychoanalytic institutes, very different places, and it had a really good reception because it's, I would have to say one of its kind. I don't know of any other like audiovisual or even written account of Latin X psychoanalysts talking about their experience working with psychoanalytic experience working with the Hispanic or Latinx population. It's quite a very unique thing, right? So it had a lot of good reception amongst, there's a lot of Black and brown therapists all over the United States, and they wanted to see themselves also somehow represented by, as you say, all the different analysts that we were, people who were originally from Puerto Rico, from Central America, from Mexico, I'm from Venezuela, from Cuba, all of us, working here in the United States. So that was important to see them represented, themselves represented in us and in our work. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about the kind of work that we show there in the documentary is, as you might know, in mental health clinics, which is where most, impoverished people of color reach out to for to treatment, to some form of psychotherapy, what are called the agencies, where the fees are very low, or they take Medicaid, for example. It's most of the forms of therapies that are offered there are more manualistic, symptom focused kinds of, and very short-term kinds of therapies. So that's the first thing. I can tell you that because I worked for years in an agency and I could see that. What this means is that these kinds of therapies focus only on the symptoms, right? So somebody will come with a complaint about, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm suffering from PTSD, or I can't, sleep, or the classic one that it's very common amongst our community, which is I had an ataque de nervios, or like a nervous attack, which is pretty common in the Latino population. They'll come and then they'll be treated with the kinds of therapies that focus only on the symptoms and on specific coping techniques, right? Like kind of like how to cope with anxiety, how to cope with depression. And so psychodynamic or psychoanalytic therapy, which is not focused only on symptoms, but on the person as a whole, and then understanding their whole narrative, right? Who they are as a person at a deeper level, is never really addressed in these clinics. A lot it's because they're not well funded. The pay is very low. It's mostly interns who come in and come out. So they wanted to keep it fast, right? And it's also based on the insurance thing where, they want the treatments to go as fast as possible. So there's no real time to focus on the real person, on the whole person, to listen to their histories and their stories. And it's not, so it's a form of therapy, psychoanalysis, which is not based on the symptom, but understanding of the whole dynamic of the person's personality. So that's one thing that that we were trying to address. And I think it's a shame because a lot of these people, for example, when I worked there, to give you a specific example, I would just sit with them and ask them, what brings you here? Tell me about you. And they were very shocked to have somebody just listen to them for 45 minutes without saying anything, just listening to them. They were expecting, again, this very manualistic kind of intervention where the therapist tells the client, you have to do this, you have to do that. And there's a lot of kind of like infantilization of impoverished populations where they're constantly told what to do this or that, and not a real respect for the patient's subjectivity or depth or psychological dimension. So when I would just sit there and listen to them, they would be like, aren't you going to say anything? They were also very moved to just, for the first time, and they'd been in the system, in the mental health system for years, somebody sit with them for the very first time and just shut up and listen attentively to everything they've been through. That in itself was already therapeutic, right? So it's a different form of therapy. It's more long-term. It's not focused necessarily on symptoms, and it has good results. But again, there's a conflict, as you were saying, between the mental health system here, which is a disaster, I have to say, and the mental health system, where, therapists badly paid come in, come out. There's no real continuation of care in the disadvantaged populations. They need to, get out of the treatment as soon as possible. And there's people it doesn't mean that there aren't people who care. There are people who work there, they care. I really respect their resilience and their wanting to help. But it's kind of like a system that is constantly undermining any kind of prolonged systematic treatment of people who have deep trauma that cannot be, resolved in just focusing on the symptom or on a short-term treatment. So that's what we were trying to address in the documentary, right? Because this idea that if you're poor and you're so worried about having to buy, your next meal, and whether there's this idea that you're so pressured by life that you can't think about yourself. There's this kind of like bias that poor people don't think, they don't reflect about their lives. They don't symbolize, they don't dream, they don't have it's only bias. The biases, deep biases that we have toward poor people, and then that we racialize, because a lot of the poor people in inner cities, like in New York, Philadelphia, they are people of color. So we start making the equation poor people equal black equal brown, so that black and brown people, then they can't think. They can't have long-term forms of treatment because they don't have psychological sophistication, right? That's kind of like the bias. So they shouldn't, they're not good candidates for long-term treatments such as psychoanalytic treatments.
And that's man, you touched.
And I think I just went there.
No, you
just time because I speak too much. So just whenever you want.
No, please. We appreciate, honestly, we appreciate all that information. I almost feel like you did that on purpose because you touched on every single bullet point I had, and holy cow. But so first off, some of my audience members, they're not too familiar with the system, and I've actually had people message me, right? And they don't come with bad intentions. They'll say something along the lines of, we when you compare our system to the rest of the world, we actually have resources when you compare to the bigger picture. And I tell people all the time, that's so true. And it could, and being inside, it could be so much better, because I myself work at one of these agencies, and you're right. There's so many clients, so many referrals coming in that they try making treatment and therapy itself. Let's say, you've been with that client for 3 months, there hasn't been any progress. They need a higher level of care. Ship them out to, refer them over here, get them to the courts. And I have trouble doing that because I don't have, and I work at one of these agencies, like a systematic way where, this client's going to be seen in 8 sessions. This one's going to be in 10. I don't have that. And so sometimes my therapy will go months right? And my supervisor will get on my case sometimes, but I try telling her that this wasn't how I was trained. Now, psychoanalyst analytic therapy, they don't have a time frame, and the narrative is so important. Just so that the audience gets a better understanding, Carlos. Me myself, just to give an example, I'm personally a mental health therapist, but Carlos is a psychoanalyst therapy. Analyst therapy. I might have to edit that out, Carlos. But you actually use Freudian theory, and you work on the client on the narrative that they formed in their life, and just provide a safe space for them to understand, instead of just coming in sometimes and immediately using these manual type interventions, this script almost written depending on the orientation. And so maybe what do you think is the future of psychoanalysts when it comes to these type of therapeutic interventions where there is no time limit? Because a lot of times insurance companies, Medicaid, they don't want to pay for these, and now you have these people that practice CBT a lot, that specialize in it, coming out for some reason against psychoanalysts, and it's almost the whole mental health. And I tell people all the time, it has been politicized, and so what are your thoughts about that?
Wow, I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, as you said, as you clearly portray, everything's related, right? It's related to policies. It's related to insurances. It's related to the form of therapy that is mostly pushed into the mental health system. It's all related, right? And it's also related a lot to even the American way, so to speak, if we might broadly speaking,
Yes.
of things being fast and getting results and being effective. I'm going to answer your question, right? The story is when Freud came with Jung to the United States, to Clark University, to give some talks on psychoanalysis. And the story tells that when they were arriving in New York City in a boat coming from Europe, and they saw the Statue of Liberty, he told Jung, they don't know that we're bringing them the plague. That was supposedly what Freud says. And I think what he meant with the plague, Freud never really had in high esteem American culture or the American way, because and he never thought that the future of psychoanalysis would be in the United States, because he compared psychoanalysis of the United States to this, culture of effectiveness, of things being fast, of, represented in a way by New York City, which has always been the symbol of what's new, of what's the future in some way, right? So, well, whereas psychoanalysis is a form of therapy, it's a depth kind of therapy, right? It tries to understand the unconscious dimension of the human mind, of how, those aspects of ourselves that are not transparent to ourselves, those things that we don't know, the shadow part of our life, so to speak, right? And, that takes time, right? Something that it's about psychoanalysis is that it takes time. And I think something, going back to your question, that there isn't in the clinic, especially, there is no time, because there's no time, there is no money, and
A high influx of patients.
I'm sorry?
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but a high influx of patients coming in, so then the other patients you have to come out.
My God, the amount of patients I saw, I worked at one point full time. I would have, 40 to 50 patients or clients or analysants, however you want to call them, coming in, coming out, and with very severe problems. That's the other thing, right? That a lot of people, since mental health clinicians are not well paid as they should be paid in these clinics, a lot of them are interns or people who are just starting. And that's why I respect them so much, because they're being thrown into what a friend of mine calls me, it's like the forefront of the social war, right? Because what you see there are people with really, really hardcore problems, traumas that are psychological, but also physical. They lived in their conditions of life are terrible. So it's very, very demanding and very difficult cases that many times I thought, oh man, these should be seen by people who are the most experienced, not somebody who's right out of, mental health school or clinical social work or social work school, or who's an intern. How are you going to, it's very demanding, right? And very important work. So again, you have people who are not well paid, doing work that, they're putting pressure on you to have results. Plus, you also have to do all this bureaucratic work. That's the other thing, right? That is, so you're also basically a caseworker. You're not only a therapist, you're doing the two things at the same time. And by the end of the year, well, and I can give you my example. I worked like for about 3 years. I was exhausted. I was myself having, somatic symptoms, I was somatizing. It's a lot of, there's a lot of vicarious trauma. It's a lot of work. And the problem is that the ones who end up losing are the patients, because they're not receiving the kind of care that they deserve. Okay, so going back to psychoanalysis, I think that what's the future of psychoanalysis here? I can't answer the question. I can answer the question, what should it be? I think that psychoanalysts, which are depth therapies, long-term therapies, psychoanalysts should be much more involved in working with these populations, much more than they are now. Get their asses out of their seats in their comfortable offices and go out to the field with the social workers, with the mental health clinicians, and do the work and expose and show that what they do is of value, which is a value of the community. There's a lot of now, and several people doing the work in what's called community psychoanalysis, where it's that you don't just wait for the clients to come to your office, you go to where their clients are, because that's a problem too, right? You can't expect a lot of these people of this population who are, out of work, seeing multiple doctors during the day, to just come to your office. Sometimes you got to go where they're at. And so who's willing to do that? Who's willing to put that work, right? But I think, why do I think is psychoanalysis is of value? Well, because, look, CBT, DBT, they work. I'm not saying that they don't work. They work on symptoms. They're focused on symptoms, and they work on a short-term basis. That has been proved for certain, for let's say anxiety, for depression. Lately, it's been proven that the treatment of choice for PTSD used to be some form of CBT or DBT, and more recent research has shown that it's not as efficient as it was thought, and they're recommending more long-term depth kind of therapies, more type psychoanalysis right now. There is more research on how, now you can see, nowadays what insurances sell and then therapists sell to the community is what's called evidence-based therapies, right? Which are like CBT or DBT. And now it has been shown that many of these so-called evidence-based therapies are not based on sufficient number of a sufficient number of evidence to make the claims that they're making, right? The claims that can be made is that they work for short-term treatment of particular symptoms, but then that after a while the symptoms come back. It's a quick fix, but it's not a long-term fix.
And that's, I'm so
Yes, go
sorry, and
ahead.
that's no, that I'm so sorry, and I love what you're saying, Carlos, man, and it's such an honor to be here talking to you. I really mean it, because that's the same thing that happens in the actual medical field, right? They come in with the symptoms, the doctor prescribes them medication, and then all of a sudden, yeah, the symptoms get relieved. But once the medication runs out, the 30 days, 60 days, the symptoms are back. And so people have a misunderstanding. They think between losing the symptoms and being cured. And it's almost the same thing now. It's happening in the therapeutic field, because with these modalities, when they come in, oh, look at the research, look at the evidence based on it, give us funding. And that is the goal. And people don't realize that, oh, give us funding, give us funding. But, you know, psychoanalysts go way back. And I don't know if I told you this, but I think I did, that I went all the way to Austria, and I was in Vienna, Austria. Freud's house was actually about 40 minutes. They turned it into a museum. They have his old couch there. They have all these cool things. And I actually went. So Freud touched my heart. And I love that story. I never knew about that. When he was coming in with Carl Jung, with the big time universal consciousness, which I love, but that's for another time. And he says, oh, they don't know we're bringing the plague, because American culture is all about practicality. It's all about efficiency. It's all about, I mean, before this pandemic happened, we were literally in the United States an oiled machine of trillions of dollars a year being made. I mean, there's just money being funneled everywhere. And I love how he said that, because people may not understand, but from when you say it, it sounds to me as if he knew, oh, we're bringing in all the questions and deep thinking about themselves that they don't want to hear. That we're going deeper than practicality. That's what I hear. And it's so true, man, because the narrative we form about ourselves is so crucial. And I think sometimes people just want to disregard it, and they're looking at the money and the time these type of therapy techniques like psychoanalysts take. But it's important, because the narratives we form about ourselves goes beyond brain research. You see, we can understand how the brain is firing neurons, the chemical reactions when we put certain substances in. That's all fine and dandy. But I can grab two brains that are operating almost at the same type of efficiency, and they're forming different narratives. Why? And psychoanalytic therapy actually does that. It touches the surface on that. And so thank you so much for shedding some light on that, man. And a lot of this, just for the PsychLifers out there, I know we're probably about 30 minutes in, but most of these questions revolve around Carlos's work with his other colleagues, involving around his documentary of Barrio's with the psychoanalyst background. And excuse I don't know why I'm having trouble with that word today, Carlos. I'm sorry about that, man. But here we go. Helping people narrate their story and looking at problems as underlying issues. And that's kind of what you were talking about with the symptoms. You're not focusing on the symptoms, you're focusing on the underlying issues.
Yes.
What interventions do you use so the population gets, because they love Freud, and when I put your name out there, they thought, oh my God, Freudian, oh my God, because it's rare now. It's rare. You guys are thin in numbers right now, but I feel like it's so important. So how do you get the client to talk about their underlying issues? And then after, I have a good question for you that I think the audience is going to want to hear as well.
No, I love your question. I mean, two things come to mind about what you were speaking about before and the question. One thing that was revolutionary, what I think it's very a simple thing that psychoanalysis has and that Freud started, and I still think it's very revolutionary, right? Which is the only rule of psychoanalysis. There's only one rule of psychoanalysis on the side of the patient, that they have to talk up freely about whatever comes to mind, right? It's the utmost freedom of speech in psychoanalysis, right? The patient, they talk about anything, even if it's difficult or if they feel that it's unimportant, right? So a patient might come in and you tell, well, tell me about whatever comes to mind, or what you have in mind today. And the patient might say, well, I'm thinking about, I made my black beans and they burned, and they start associating from the black beans to the way their grandmother prepared the black beans, and then the grandmother reminds them, you know, they get emotional about remembering about the grandmother whom they haven't seen in a while. And then again, it's all these associations, and then you enter into this convoluted web that is the person's history and the person's mind, right? And you get to understand it, kind of like lay out the whole web of that is a human mind, right? So that's the first thing. It's the revolutionary aspect of just letting the person speak. Just speak. Don't tell them what to do. Don't give them advice. Just let them speak. That's the first thing. That is, I think it's still very revolutionary, right? So, and that ties into your second question. What do I do with a patient? Well, I just let them speak. And this, well, related to letting them speak is really, which is the other side of psychoanalysis, is really, really learning to listen. And listen, because when we're talking and we're listening, especially when we're listening, most people are thinking about what they're gonna say next, right? About the comeback, or they're thinking about themselves. No, the thing about analytic listening, there's an analyst that is called Bion, who says that you have to listen and go to each session without memory or desire. What does that mean, right? Without memory. It's like you're going, like each session, you're going to as if you were meeting the person for the first time, right? You have to let yourself just be surprised by whatever they have to say. Leave aside as much your own stuff as you can, and without desire, not wanting the patient to say this or say that or do this or do that. Just be fully receptive. That's not easy, my friend, because that's, you know, we're taught the contrary, to always be thinking about a comeback and to appear smart and to give advice or that. So these are two things, right? Hearing, just inviting the patient to talk and listening. And you're going to be surprised of how many people are just eager to want to talk and tell their stories if you're receptive to them. You know, you just ask them. I ask a person who comes to see me, well, so what brings you here? And they'll start speaking. And they start, and then you get very curious about this or that, right? About what they said, what they're leaving out, what they're not saying, the way they said it, how they hesitated in pronouncing a certain word, how they might have repeated something twice, and then you note that. And then you start seeing through the speech that a certain patterns emerge, right? And then you start becoming mindful of these patterns, right? These, like, let me give you an example, right? Like a patient comes and for the first 5 minutes is saying, oh, doctor, or Carlos, or whatever they, you know, people call you in different ways. They say, oh, you know, I had a really great week, and they tell you about their week, and they're very excited for the very 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden they say, but, and then after the but, it's like a litany of complaints and terrible things, right? And then the next 40 minutes is just something very, very negative. Then you hear it once, you hear it twice, 3 times, 4 times, and you start hearing that pattern, right? The person comes, say something exciting, and then there's a but. And then after a while, it happens many times, you hear it, and you might tell the person, you know, I've noticed that when you come to see me, you start talking about something exciting, and then all of a sudden you stop yourself with a but and start talking about everything that's negative. And you ask them, what comes to mind about this? You see, it's very old pattern. And then you might be, you know, discover a whole bunch of things, right? What could it mean, right? That they don't let themselves get too excited. Maybe excitement is connected to feeling guilty, right? Because maybe when they were growing up, they had a mother or a father who would never let them get too excited, right? They were like, hey, calm down, calm down. So it's kind of like maybe a reproduction of a relationship they had with their parents. So you start discovering, and that's what it goes to the issue of the problem, right? to not the issue, the underlying dynamic of the problem. Like somebody is constantly, let's say, depressed. That's the symptom. The more manualistic forms of therapies might tell you, well, how to cope with depression and kind of like teach that to everybody. But you gotta, with an analytic point of view, you have to say, well, what's the underlying unconscious dimension of this depression, right? What is it about this depression? Because everybody, and that's an umbrella term, right? Everybody says I'm depressed, but we're interested in what does that depression mean to that specific person? We're interested in the singularity of one person. Your depression is not the same as my depression, or what you mean by depression is not the same as what I mean by depression, or the term anxiety. Nowadays, everybody's anxious, right? I suffers from anxiety. The first thing I asked them, what do you mean by anxiety? How does anxiety feel like to you? So you see, so I want to get to the uniqueness of that experience, right? And then the anxiety or the depression, you might discover that it has to do with, a form of self-punishment, right? Maybe somebody, every time they feel that they're going to achieve something, they feel guilty because they feel they don't deserve it. So they punish themselves unconsciously and get depressed. Because when you're depressed, you can't do, what you want to do. So maybe depression is a form of punishing yourself because you feel that you don't deserve things. You don't deserve achieving things, right? So, that's the underlying thing. But in order to get to this underlying unconscious dynamic, you have to listen to the whole story. You need the context. You have to let the person speak in the way that I'm not letting you speak now, right?
No, please. I just have so many good questions, man, because you got so much good stuff. You're like that distant star that you can't find, right? And then once the telescope hits on it, man, that star is unique, I can't stop looking at it. That's the way I see you right now, man. And okay, so to piggyback off that, because you talked about the rules of psychoanalytics, how you go into the session, how you let everything out. You're there with that client, that patient, that client. You're analyzing their story. You're focusing on the underlying issues. You're treating them as a human being instead of just some script, right? But now I used to get this a lot more, but now I get it a little bit less, thank goodness, because you see, people see things on Netflix like Hannibal Lecter, right? Or they've watched the movie and they get this wrong idea of what a therapist is or what a psychologist is. And so I used to get things all the time about dreams. And I know Freud, Freud all the time, oh, I had this dream. What does this mean? And I don't think people understand that unless I have, first off, I don't know what that, even if I knew you very good, that doesn't mean I'm going to know what it means. It just, I can be a guide, a facilitator for that, which sounds like almost psychoanalyst. How do psychoanalysts help those decipher their dreams? And how long do you work with a client before you start feeling like, hey, I know the story of this person enough from piecing it together, looking back at my notes to help them figure it out? Do they still sit on a couch and lay down while they talk in regards to that? I'm sorry, these are very basic questions. I know you already mentioned the outpatient, but people want to, the audience wants to know some of these stuff. So I appreciate you, man.
Questions. I want to make, and I appreciate your questions because I want to make psychoanalysis people feel that it's something closed, right? It's not a 19th century thing that a Viennese guy did and that is done no more. That's a lot, and I want to make it relevant and make it relevant especially for, the population that I work with, right? Let me tell you, I also teach at Hunter College at the Masters of Social Work. And we read Freud here and there. And I remember one Black student telling me, Professor, you're gonna have to convince me why I have to read a white guy from the 19th century, right? So that's the challenge. Why is that important? What does he have to say that's important? What idea? So I appreciate your questions, right? So one thing is that with the aspect of the or Hannibal Lecter show, you know, people imagine the therapist, and especially the analyst, as this creature that knows everything about the other person. Is the connection okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh yeah, it's that I don't know, you got frozen. I wasn't sure.
No.
Okay. So people have this image of the therapist or the analyst, especially. I don't know. I can't remember if Hannibal Lecter was a psychoanalyst. He might have been, but that's something to check. But probably was. But in any case, this idea that the analyst or the therapist is the one who knows everything, right?
Yes.
You know, it's like you're an oracle. You know everything about the person's life, right? And that you're just keeping it secret or something. And it's the opposite, right? We're not here because we know better than the patient. We don't know better than the patient how the patient should lead their lives. We're here, as you well said before, we're like, you know, it's a joint collaborative process, right? Where I help the other person figure out how their mind works, right? But the work is mostly done by the other person, not by me. I'm a facilitator, right? That's the first thing. That's very important. I might have certain hypotheses or ideas or possible interpretations in mind, but I don't say them. And they're always, I don't say them until I feel that it's very close in the material. That's an important thing, that you always stay very close with what the patient is saying. That's something that you know, like TV therapists do very badly, right? Is that, you know, you're speaking about, you know, again, the same example. I'm talking about the patient is talking about eggs or about the black beans, and then the therapist makes this interpretation, you know, I think that's related to your mother or this or that. And then it's like, you know, no, a good therapist is not going to do that. You stay close with the material, very, very close, right? Somebody says you're only like maybe half a step ahead of the patient, if you're ahead a little bit, only a little bit, right? So stay close to the material. Don't, you know, always be open to changing your ideas of what the patient says, right? That's another thing that's important. And wait till, when do I start telling something to the patient? Well, when it's happened, when whatever I see, be it, let's say, a pattern, I see it happen a sufficient number of times, right? When I have, I mean, this could be like a little rule that I have, and I guess others have. When I'm very eager to say something, right? I'm very eager to like make an interpretation, which is a way of letting the person understand something about themselves that they didn't understand before, right? Before I make I have like this, you know, I really want to say it right now. I mostly say, wait. I say, I'm going to wait a little more, right? Because I want to be sure. And then a lot of people, especially when you're starting, they feel, oh, you're going to lose the moment. No, the thing is, if it's important, it's going to come back again, right? These things that we're talking, patterns, structures, if you're right about them, they're going to come back again sooner or later. So I wait several times, and I wait for the right moment until when my comment is going to be emotionally meaningful to the patient. That's the other thing. If psychoanalysis or any form of therapy is not an emotional experience, it's nothing. It's just an intellectual, you know, maybe in exchange or this or that. You have to find the right words. That's the other thing. The words that that are gonna, you know, move the patient in an emotional way, right? So that's another way of saying that you have to learn the language of the patient. So you have to speak to the patient in their own language. Everybody has their own different language, their own idiolect, their own, right? So with some people, I'll use certain expressions. With other people, I use other expressions. It's like learning different languages with different people. Because if I don't speak to the patient in their own language, they're not going to really receive it. it's not going to be emotional. It's not going to be close to them, right? So that's the other thing. And the last thing in terms of what you were saying of couches or face-to-face, okay, now most psychoanalytic treatments, I mean, most are done face-to-face. The couch is what's the reason? I have patients that I see on the couch or that I used to see on the couch before COVID, right? So now patients that I saw on the couch, we do on the telephone, right? What's the reason for the couch? There's nothing magical, right, about the couch. Some people say that Freud used the couch because he couldn't tolerate seeing patients face-to-face for 10 straight hours back-to-back. So he needed to put them on the couch. I can't, the pressure is too much for 10 straight hours. Some people say that. I think that, but the couch, what I found, I don't think I'm very flexible that way, right? I don't think that unless you use the couch, you're not using psychoanalysis. You're not doing psychoanalysis. But what the couch can do with certain people, right, is make them a little more introspective, right? Like, for example, Juan, if I ask you, what did you have for dinner last Monday?
I need some time to think about it because I can't remember.
Okay, you see what you just did? You immediately looked away from me. So, it's difficult to think about something when you're looking at somebody in the eyes. You ask that question to anybody, people are gonna look away. They're gonna say, well, give me a chance. And you'll do this, right? It promotes introspection, right? And you wanna promote that in the person, right? That they think more about themselves, and then that way they can, for example, going back to the dreams, people can maybe, dreams are going to start to emerge and people are going to want to share them with you. And then look, and when it comes to dreams, just like with everything, you're not going to have the interpretation immediately. That's a fantasy that everybody has, that it happens to you, right? That we're like these, fortune tellers. You tell me a dream, yeah. I know what it means. No, that's or like we're like these dream books, right? Where snake means this, apple or chair means that, or this, there's meanings. No, for psychoanalysis, the dreams are deeply personal expressions. So what it means, I need your associations to the dream. I mean, meaning the patient's associations to the dream. I need time too. So, and then sessions afterwards, we figure out the dream, or we're working on a dream for 2 months, right? Because there's a lot there in the dream, right? A lot that's not expressed in a direct way, that's disguised, right? That it's kind of like wrapped up in a mysterious secret way that makes us want to understand. But everybody feels that their dreams tell us something about themselves. And you can see that in the documentary. I ask people about their dreams in the streets, right? And some people, they always mean, people through all ages, they've always felt that dreams mean something. Sometimes it's like, oh, my grandmother speaking to me, I dream with number 24, I have to play it in the, in the lotto or whatever. But people, they see it as messages, right? It's fascinating and they want to figure it out. They puzzle people. So that's a good way into the internal world of somebody, the dreams, because it's something that comes from them or from something from inside them, but that it's not conscious, right? It's an unconscious production. You didn't plan to have the dream. Nobody plans to dream this or that. It just happens to you, but it's part of you. So it gives you a little bit of an insight into that unconscious world of your mind. There's something in you, right, that is working you from the inside and that you have no control over. But that makes you want to understand. It kind of like invites you to understand it, to interpret it, right? So I think I love working with dreams because people get very curious. It makes them very curious about themselves. Oh my God, why did I all of a sudden, you know, Carlos, I had this dream last night. It was very weird with, you know, and people have sometimes it doesn't have to be like dreams of like, you know, surrealistic, fantastic dreams. It was like, you know, I had this dream with this boy that from my grade school that I haven't seen in ages. And then he suddenly appears in my dream. What the hell? What is he doing there? And then they get like curious, right? I said, so what comes to mind about that boy from your high school or from your school? And then they'll start speaking about the boy, right? And then something will come up. You just have to wait, right? And be patient. That's the other thing. It takes a lot of patience.
And you really deciphered that about the dream, but I love how you use the word facilitator along with decipher for the dreams. And it's the client or the patient that's doing the work. And you're not trying to intervene. You're staying close to the topic. And man, you really provided some good stuff. I guess we're gonna finish it on this notion because I know we're running out of time, Carlos. The Freud unconscious, right, is termed in a certain way. He viewed the unconscious almost like a primitive state, and the new unconscious meaning we understand that most of our actions and behaviors and thoughts and just overall experience tends to happen in unconscious manners rather than conscious. And so yes, with that being said, a lot of people are debunking Freud just for that simple fact, when he really brought the unconscious into light. And it's for years, for decades, the field of psychology was scared to talk about the unconscious because it couldn't be measured. And now we see, and now with brain science, it can be measured that the unconscious is very real. But people still now continue to debunk Freud because of certain terms like the Oedipus complex is a perfect one, where he saw that as part of the unconscious process. Now we know that's not true, but the unconscious is very real. What are your thoughts on that? Because I find Freud to be a pioneer when he talks about the unconscious. Some of the details might have been off in the beginning, but that's what we have science for. So just your thoughts on that in general.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting that the one thing that is most psychoanalytic is the unconscious, and probably I haven't talked about it that much, or maybe in some way. Maybe I don't want to talk about it. No, but you're absolutely right. Let me see how to put it. For me, the unconscious is, well, I always explain it to people. It's something very simple, if you think about it, right? And that's how I'm gonna connect Freud with current understandings of the unconscious, right? It's this simple idea that people are people who can interpret, they're self-interpretant beings. What does that mean, right? Let's say I have a breakup with my partner, right? And I get really sad. And then I start thinking about, well, the breakup is going to have a meaning to me, right? I might say, well, you know, I did something wrong, or why do I always get into these kinds of relationships that are meant to, not to work? It has a meaning. I'm going to start thinking about the meaning of the breakup. And then maybe in 5 years, the meaning of the same breakup is going to change, right? I might say, oh, thank God I broke up, right? Or I might say the opposite. Oh, I should have stayed with that person. So we interpret our lives always in different ways, where that's a capacity that we have as beings who have a language. We interpret people and we interpret ourselves, right? So why did I do this? Why did I do that? Why do I feel this way? Why am I having this thought? Okay, so that's one thing. But we are also the beings who suffer from reflexive breakdowns. Sometimes we say or do things of which we cannot give a rational account. So going back to the same case of the partner, why do I always get into these relationships that don't work? This doesn't make sense. I don't want to, but I always find myself in these relationships, right? That's a classical example that we've probably all been through. Or people sometimes feel depressed, right? And they don't know where they're depressed, right? Oh, I've heard patients saying, you know, I have a good partner, I have a good job, I have everything, and I'm miserable and I'm depressed. And they don't know why. Where is it coming from? Or somebody might, the classical slips of tongue, right? When you want to say something but say something else instead, right? That, you know, that's the Freudian slip, right? And you want to say, you know, let's say your boyfriend is called like Mike, and then you're gonna instead of saying Mike, you say Johnny, and Johnny's the name of your father, and they're like, oh, sorry, I meant Mike. So what happened there, right? And you can't understand, you know, what happened there. So there's moments in which we can't give a rational account of what we say or what we do. We suffer from like these moments of rational breakdown, right? Why do I do this? Why do I say this? Okay, that's for me is the unconscious. What it means is that we're not fully transparent to ourselves. That's why we need another person in the sort of some form of a mirror, or entering in a relationship, in an emotionally charged relationship with another, to be able to see ourselves through the other person, right? Because we're not transparent to ourselves, right? There are many of our actions that are unconsciously motivated, right? I might discover that I called my partner the name of my father because, you know, he reminds me of my father somehow, right? Or he reminds me, or some aspect. Or I'm angry at my partner in ways that I'm angry at my father, and I wasn't conscious of that. But it's motivated by some unconscious reasons, right? So that's one thing, right? For me, that's the basic idea of, if I want to put it simple, we're not transparent to ourselves. That's a fantasy that comes from, I don't know, maybe from the Enlightenment, the idea that we can understand ourselves fully. There's the greatest part of our personalities on our minds are unknown to us. And these unknown elements of our personalities, which we call it the unconscious, which it has an effect on the way we act, the way we speak. That brings us to the contemporary idea, right? All the biases that we might have, like racial biases, gender biases, right? All of that are unconscious. There's been a lot of research, for example, about people who are self-declared anti-racist, which is a very current topic, right? They'll say, everybody, I'm anti-racist. And they believe they're anti-racist, right? And there's what's it called now, tests, like experiments, right? That show that most people who like have to declare constantly that they're anti-racist, deep down, they have a lot of racist reactions and a lot of racist biases. Or let's go back to the people who are homophobic, right? We always know, right? The people who are, you know, these conservative politicians who are anti-gay, anti-that, and all of a sudden they discover that they all along had a gay lover, right? That is, again, there's research been done on that, right? It's like the people, they're trying to actively, you know, by doing something, they're trying not to think about something that's unconscious, right? Because, and that's the aspect, the Freudian unconscious, which is still part of the contemporary unconscious, is that these unconscious things are kept unconscious because they enter in conflict with who we think we are. They enter in conflict with the good image that we might have of ourselves, right? We don't want to.
Yeah, no, I'm so sorry, man. It's just you touched on a good point there on how most of our biases are unconscious. So anybody's time and in every moment, the moment I meet someone, immediately, unconsciously, my brain is analyzing them and forming conclusions based on my experiences. And I love that about Freud. And bro, you've provided today, Carlos, some great topics. I really hope everybody checks out your documentary. But I want to give you some closing words before I say the last words and to the audience. Do you want to say anything, man? You touched on so many great topics. from Freud, from the documentary, from psychoanalysts, and not only the work you're doing, but the work the profession's trying to do, how the narrative is so much more important than a manual scripture in treatment. And I appreciate you so much. Any closing words for the audience, Carlos, man? I really appreciate you. It's such an honor to have you on this platform.
No, thanks for having me. I had a good time. Closing words. What can I say? All mental, people who are from the mental health fields and see this, I invite you to, especially people of color, which are very underrepresented in the psychoanalytic field, which is mostly white. I invite you to try and train. We need you more. More people of color are looking for therapists of color who are well-trained, who are empathetic, who are going to let them speak and tell their story. So I invite you to maybe become interested in analysis. And it's a white world. Mostly, but I think I think it's the future of psychoanalysis. If psychoanalysis is going to survive in the future, it is going to be through those people that have been normally marginalized within the mental health field. It is going to be through Black, brown, queer people. There's a whole history with, psychoanalysis, pathologizing, being gay, and the whole medical establishment. So it is through, I think, these left out populations that is psychoanalysis will have a future. I think that's a problem. I could say many things, because psychoanalysis is about, and it was born out of, remember, it was born out of Freud, who was a Jewish person in the middle of a mostly of an anti-Semitic culture. So psychoanalysis is born from the margins, from people who have been marginalized. It's born out of a theory of things that people don't want to think about, right? So I think that the people who are meant to inherit Freud's and psychoanalytic thinking are these people, are marginalized peoples, are queer, brown, Black, people of all colors, all people who have been marginalized in many ways. I think we are the ones who are meant to inherit this, if psychoanalysis has a future, I think.
And to me it does. And I just want to let the audience know, thank you for tuning in. Carlos provided some tremendous insight. Stay tuned, because I am going to either post the link on the Spotify, if you can click it, or on the YouTube channel, so you can reach Carlos's documentary and in Barrios with his colleagues who are also psychoanalysts. And I really appreciate you, Carlos. It's such a pleasure, man, to have you on this platform and really just talk to someone from a Freudian background of school, and someone who's more interested in the narrative than a time frame. Someone who's more interested in the story of the person than just coping and the symptomatology. And for that, my friend, thank you so much. And thank you, PsychLifers out there, all right?
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
PsychLifer, all right? Take care, guys.